Everyone on your floor thinks you're barely getting by. You've worked the same unit for 22 years. You drive a 2011 minivan with a coat hanger holding the side mirror in place, and you bring the same turkey sandwich in the same crumpled foil almost every shift. When the younger nurses chip in for a birthday lunch, someone always quietly covers your share and nobody makes a thing of it because everybody around you has decided, without ever saying it out loud, that you're the one who's struggling. Here's what none of them know. You have $2.7 million sitting across a brokerage account and two retirement accounts. You could retire tonight and never work another shift for the rest of your life. You are, by a wide margin, the wealthiest person on that floor, doctors included, and for over 2 decades you've done one very specific thing on purpose to make sure not one of them could ever guess it. You know this isn't really about a hospital. Maybe your version of this is an office, a job site, a school. Maybe you're already living some version of it, or maybe, if you're honest, you used to be someone who could have, back before the money started talking you into things. Today we're going to open up exactly what this habit is, where it shows up in your actual life down to the dollar, and why almost everyone who could keep it walks away the moment they're finally able to afford not to. Before we get into how you'd actually build this, it's worth saying why it matters beyond one nurse's parking spot. Most personal finance content in the US either sells you a get-rich shortcut or shames you for a latte. Neither one is true and neither one is useful. What we're doing here is different. We're looking at what the actual data shows about how ordinary Americans end up with extraordinary balance sheets, and none of it involves a lottery ticket or a secret app. If that's the kind of thing you want more of in your feed, go ahead and hit subscribe right now, because what's coming in the next 20 minutes is going to change how you look at every raise, every bonus, and every "you deserve this" purchase for the rest of your life. Here's the habit, stated as plainly as it can be put. The moment more money enters your life does not get more expensive. Not a little, not just this once, not ever. When your pay goes up, your spending stays exactly where it was, and the difference goes somewhere it can grow before you ever get the chance to feel it, get used to it, or build a new normal around it. That's the entire mechanism. It sounds almost insultingly simple, and that simplicity is exactly why it works, and exactly why so few people actually do it. Watch what happens to most people instead, because you've felt this pull yourself more than once. The raise lands and the car gets swapped for something a little nicer because you earned it. The bonus hits and the apartment gets upgraded because why not? The promotion comes through and suddenly the couch you liked fine last month looks embarrassing. The phone feels a generation behind. The whole life feels a size too small for the new title. Nobody sits down and decides to do this. It happens by default, automatically, the way water finds the lowest point in a room. Income goes up. Spending rises to meet it every single time unless you actively stop it. Picture a coworker of yours, a respiratory therapist named Marcus. Marcus waited 3 years for a raise that finally added about $650 a month to his take-home pay. The night it hit his account, he felt something real, a kind of relief after years of tight months. So he let himself breathe. A better lease, a few subscriptions that felt harmless on their own, dinner out twice a week instead of once. None of it reckless, none of it a single bad decision you could point to and call a mistake. Within about 4 months, the $650 had simply dissolved into a life that now felt normal at that new level, the same way the ocean feels normal to a fish. Here's the part that should actually unsettle you. Marcus wasn't happier. The raise he'd waited 3 years for bought him the exact same Sunday night anxiety about money, just recalibrated to a slightly higher number. Now compare that to what you actually did the last time your own pay went up. Same kind of raise, same kind of dollar amount, except you routed it automatically into a plain, boring S&P 500 index fund the same day it landed, before it ever touched your checking account. At a historical market return in the range of 9 to 10% a year, a redirected raise like that, left alone for 25 years, grows to somewhere around $700,000. Not from a stock tip, not from a side hustle, from a raise you'd already earned and simply never let yourself feel. The car is where this habit is easiest for other people to see, because a car is the one purchase the entire world watches you make. There's a nurse manager on your floor, Priya, who leases a new SUV every 3 years for right around $780 a month, which happens to be close to the national average new vehicle payment reported by Experian for 2026. Priya will be making a car payment for the rest of her working life because there's always a next lease waiting at the end of the last one. To everyone on that floor, Priya looks like she's winning. You, in that minivan with the taped up mirror, look like you're barely holding on. Run the actual math and the picture flips completely. A new vehicle loses close to a fifth of its value in the first year alone, and roughly half its value within 5 years, according to data tracked by Kelley Blue Book. You bought your van used for under $14,000 15 years ago and have spent a fraction of what Priya spends annually just keeping it running. The difference between what you each put toward a vehicle, conservatively $500 a month, has gone into the market instead of into a machine that loses value every time it's driven. Over 25 years at historical returns, that $500 a month becomes somewhere north of $500,000. Same floor, same paycheck range, two completely different financial universes, and the one that looks like success from the parking lot is the one quietly bleeding out. Housing tells the same story at a larger scale, and it's the one that actually wrecks people. Think of a couple you might know in real life, the ones who did everything right. Good jobs, rising incomes, and the day finally came when they bought the dream house, the good school district, the kitchen island, all the rooms they'd pictured filling up with an entire future. And from the week they got the keys, the mortgage quietly started eating them alive. It was 38% of their take-home pay the first year. Once property taxes rose and the insurance premium jumped and the roof needed work, it crept toward 50%. According to the Census Bureau's most recent housing cost data, that's not a rare story. It's close to a third of American mortgage holders, and the share is worse in expensive metro areas. That couple owns 4 bedrooms and can't afford to furnish 2 of them. You, meanwhile, have lived in the same 3 bedroom ranch for 19 years, paid it off 11 years ago, and could buy that dream house twice over in cash without blinking. From the street, the dream house looks like a rival. On the actual balance sheet, it's one of the single most common reasons hardworking Americans hit 50 with almost nothing to show for 3 decades of raises. Here's where people misjudge you the most, though, because they assume this habit means you're cheap in every direction, and that's not remotely true. Watch where your money actually goes. You'll nurse that minivan for another 5 years and refuse to replace a phone that still works fine. And, in the same month, write a check covering your granddaughter's first semester of community college without a second thought. You're ruthless about the things nobody else ever sees and generous, almost recklessly generous, about the things that actually last. You've stood on the other side of this exact choice before too. You've paid extra for the version with the name on it and told yourself you were treating yourself. Be honest about what that purchase actually bought you. About 4 minutes of being noticed, and the moment was already fading by the time you got back to your car. Money spent to be seen is gone the second it leaves your hand. Money spent on something real is still compounding 30 years later. To be fair to yourself, this isn't a call to become a monk who never enjoys a dollar. That version of this habit turns into its own quiet prison, and it's not what actually builds a life worth having. The whole point of widening that gap for 2 decades is so that eventually the money can do the heavy lifting instead of you having to. You fly to see your son's family twice a year now. Instead of doing the 14-hour drive you used to grit your teeth through. You bought good winter boots that will last 15 years instead of the cheapest pair on the shelf. You paid for your granddaughter's flight without hesitating for a second. The rule underneath all of it is one sentence: spend freely on what genuinely improves your life, and refuse to spend on what only improves how your life looks to people who were never really watching anyway. Here's the part that would actually surprise the people on your floor more than the number itself. Nothing is stopping you from spending it. You're not white-knuckling through a sacrifice, waiting for permission to finally live differently. At $2.7 million, you could liquidate a chunk of that portfolio tomorrow, buy the Tesla in the parking lot in cash, gut the kitchen, and never feel the dent by next quarter. You don't, and it isn't fear keeping you from it. Somewhere over the last 20 years, the habit stopped being a means to an end and quietly became the thing you like about your life. The van isn't a sacrifice you're still making. It's a life you'd choose even with another zero on the balance. Ask yourself honestly, if the number tripled overnight, would the van change? You already know it wouldn't. That's the real difference between being disciplined and having actually arrived. Discipline grits its teeth. You just genuinely live here now. The habit gets tested hardest not by the slow raises but by the sudden ones, and this is where most people quietly fail without ever realizing it happened. A few years back, you got a small inheritance when your mother passed, just under $40,000. Grief money, the kind that shows up all at once and feels like it's supposed to be spent on something that matters. A coworker in the same situation the year before had used a similar amount to gut renovate her kitchen, and for a while, everyone on the floor talked about how nice it turned out. You sat with the $40,000 for exactly 11 days, moved it into the same index fund you'd been feeding for 2 decades, and never mentioned it to anyone at work. Nobody's kitchen changed. Nobody threw you a compliment about granite countertops. At a conservative long-term return, that single windfall, left alone for 15 years, is on pace to clear $160,000 by itself. The kitchen would have been beautiful for about 18 months before it just became the kitchen again. The counters as invisible to your coworker as the old ones had been. Your 40,000 is still working, silently, right now, while you're watching this. The same restraint shows up in something as small as a closet. The average American household spends somewhere north of $1,700 a year on clothing and accessories, according to Bureau of Labor Statistics data, and that number climbs fast for anyone rotating an image for coworkers, for social media, for a version of themselves they're trying to keep current. You own 4 pairs of scrubs and wear them until the fabric gives out, not because you can't afford more, but because a 15th identical pair of scrubs was never going to make you feel any richer than the first one did. It's a few $1,000s a year that sounds trivial in isolation. Stack it next to the van, the house, the inheritance, and you start to see that it was never really about any one category. It was always about the same single decision, made over and over, in every category that offered you a chance to make it. None of this comes free, and it's worth being honest about the actual cost because it isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in how people read you. You're the coworker who still drives the old van while everyone else upgrades. The aunt who brings her own lunch to the family barbecue instead of ordering the good caterer everyone else chipped in for. People notice. Somebody makes a joke that's really a question underneath. A relative quietly decides you must be struggling and mentions it to someone else at Thanksgiving. You know this and you've made your peace with it because you ran the actual math on what being admired costs versus what being free costs, and you picked the cheaper one on purpose. There's a deeper trait underneath all of this that almost nobody can fake, and it isn't discipline. You genuinely don't organize your decisions around what anyone else thinks of you. Not as a mindset you're working on, just a weight you set down a long time ago and never picked back up. A 2025 survey from LendingTree found that more than a third of Americans admit to spending money specifically to keep up appearances with friends, family, or coworkers, and a large share of them said it strained their finances in the process. Most people are unconsciously pricing their decisions against the imagined judgment of people who are themselves one bad month from real trouble. It's borrowing financial advice from someone who's drowning. You stopped listening to that particular audience a long time ago, and the silence you got in return turned out to be worth more than anything you gave up for it. If the habit is this powerful, the obvious question is why almost nobody actually keeps it once they could afford to stop. The honest answer is that it's hardest to hold on to at the exact moment it finally starts paying off. You and a tech named Josh got hired at that hospital the same month, years ago, same starting pay, same shift schedule. Every time his pay went up, Josh upgraded something. The car, the apartment, the watch, always half a step ahead of the next raise. For years, he looked like the one who'd made it. You kept driving the car you already owned, split a modest apartment, and routed a fifth of every single paycheck into an index fund before you ever saw the number in your checking account. For years, you looked like the one who never quite arrived. Then, the hospital system went through a round of layoffs, and on one ordinary Tuesday, both your names were on the same list. Same severance, same 2 weeks notice. Josh had almost nothing saved, and a stack of payments that didn't pause just because his paycheck had. He took the first offer that came in 3 weeks later, on someone else's terms, because his bills weren't going to wait for the right opportunity. You had a cushion deep enough to actually breathe. You took 4 months, turned down 2 jobs that weren't a fit, and landed somewhere better than where you started. Same hospital, same years worked, same starting salary. The only difference between the two of you was what happened to the gap every time a raise came through. The part of this you care about most, though, isn't even your own number. It's what happens 2 tables over. Someday, at your own table, picture 2 different households at 2 different dinner tables. At one, money is a tense, hushed subject, argued about in low voices after the kids are supposed to be in bed. A child raised at that table learns, without ever being taught directly, that money means fear, and that the way you prove you're okay is by owning something other people can see. That anxiety gets passed down like an heirloom nobody asked to inherit. At your table, the van is paid off, every raise gets invested automatically, and the word index fund gets said as casually as passing the salt. A kid raised at your table grows up watching calm instead of tension, watching a number quietly grow in the background instead of a stack of bills nobody wants to open. That kid starts adult life somewhere you had to spend 20 years clawing your way toward, and they'll likely never even know the version of the starting line you began at. If you want to start building this for real, it doesn't require overhauling your entire life this week. It requires one decision held for a long time. The next time your income goes up, from a raise, a bonus, a tax refund, anything at all, you leave your actual spending exactly where it already sits, and you send the entire difference somewhere it can grow before you get the chance to adjust to having it. You freeze the number once, and then you simply keep it frozen year after year, raise after raise, while the gap underneath does the rest of the work without needing your willpower at all. Tomorrow morning, you'll park that minivan in the same spot at the far end of the lot, walk past coworkers who will keep quietly feeling sorry for you, and eat the same sandwich out of the same crumpled foil. And you'll be, by a distance most of them cannot begin to picture, the freest person in that entire building. The real question isn't whether you could technically do this, it's whether you'll still be willing to do it the first time you actually can afford not to, because that's the exact moment almost everyone quietly gives it up. The loud ones are performing a future they haven't built yet. You already built yours, and you'd rather they kept guessing.